Picture yourself as a military commander in the 13th century, leading an enormous army made up of tens of thousands of highly trained soldiers, equipped with the finest weapons available in your era, and protected by fortresses that have resisted invaders for generations. Your confidence is unshakable. You believe your power is absolute. Then suddenly, reports reach you about a nomadic force advancing from the Mongolian steppes. They possess no grand cities, no massive stone walls, and no technology that appears superior to yours. Their numbers are not even greater than your own. Yet something about them is deeply unsettling. Every civilization that has encountered them has collapsed. From China to Persia, from Russia to the Middle East, entire empires have fallen before them. The mystery is this: how did people who lived in felt tents across open grasslands defeat the strongest and most advanced societies on Earth? What unconventional strategies did they employ that permanently transformed warfare? And beyond history, there is a deeper question to reflect on throughout this video. Can the lessons of the Mongols still be applied to our modern lives and careers? Before we explore the answer, leave a comment sharing where you are watching from and the current time. I am genuinely interested in seeing how far across the world this video is reaching. To understand why Mongol warfare was so revolutionary, we must return to the early 13th century, a time very different from the world the Mongols would later create. Warfare during this period followed predictable patterns. Armies were massive, built around heavy infantry, armored cavalry, and iron protection. Battles often centered on sieges that dragged on for months or even years. Military success was defined by size, strength, and fortifications. Victory belonged to those with the tallest walls, the thickest armor, and the largest numbers. In East Asia, the Jin dynasty ruled northern China, one of the most formidable armies on the continent. Their forces included disciplined infantry units, heavily armored cavalry, and an extensive network of defensive fortifications. To the west, the Khwarezmian Empire stretched from Persia deep into Central Asia, boasting enormous armies and wealthy cities shielded by towering stone walls. In Europe, armored knights and fortified castles represented the peak of military power. These civilizations believed themselves nearly invincible. Then there were the Mongols. They were nomads of the steppe, herders who moved with the seasons and lived in portable tents. They had no cities, no factories, and no formal industry. They lacked even a written language until Genghis Khan adopted one from the Uyghurs. Yet despite all this, they would become the most terrifying military force in history. So what made them so deadly? Before examining their tactics, it is essential to understand one fundamental truth. The Mongols did not simply train warriors. Their entire way of life produced warriors. Every Mongol child, whether male or female, learned to ride horses by the age of 3. By 5, they were practicing archery. This training did not take place in organized military schools or camps. It happened naturally while herding animals, hunting, and surviving on the open steppe. Genghis Khan famously said, "Hunting is the best training for war," and he was absolutely right. When Mongol hunters surrounded herds of wild animals across the vast plains, they were rehearsing real battlefield maneuvers. They practiced coordination, encirclement, ambushes, and precise timing. These skills translated directly into warfare. While soldiers in feudal Europe or China were recruited shortly before conflicts, trained briefly, and then sent into battle, Mongol warriors had spent decades refining their combat abilities. Many had 20 or 30 years of experience before ever facing an enemy army. Nomadic life also created extraordinary resilience. Mongols were accustomed to surviving in extreme environments, from brutal winter cold to scorching summer heat. They could endure hunger, exhaustion, and harsh conditions without losing effectiveness. A Mongol warrior could survive for days on minimal food, such as dried meat and fermented mare's milk. This endurance gave them a massive advantage over settled armies that depended on supply lines and comfort. Perhaps the most critical advantage of all was the Mongol horse. These horses were smaller than traditional war horses, standing only about 1.3 meters tall. But they were incredibly tough. Shaped by centuries of natural selection on the steppe, they could survive on wild grass, dig through snow to find food, and travel immense distances without rest. Each Mongol warrior maintained 3 or 4 horses, allowing them to rotate mounts and remain constantly mobile. While enemy armies needed frequent stops, Mongols could travel more than 100 miles per day for several consecutive days. Now imagine you are preparing for battle, believing the Mongols are 3 days away. You think you have time, but by the next morning, they are already at your gates. Their speed shattered every traditional assumption of warfare. Finally, we arrive at their most infamous tactic, the feigned retreat. One classic example occurred at the Battle of Badger Pass in 1211. This vital mountain pass protected the Jin dynasty capital and was heavily fortified with elite troops. Genghis Khan's general Jeeb knew a direct assault would fail. Instead, he launched a limited attack, convincing the defenders that the Mongols were desperate. After a day of fighting, the Mongols deliberately retreated, appearing disorganized and broken, luring their enemies into a fatal pursuit. Seeing a chance to finish the enemy, the Jin forces sent scouts to track the retreat. The reports confirmed what they hoped for. The Mongols were withdrawing toward the open steppe. On the second day, the retreat continued without change. On the third day, it was the same. To the Jin commander, it appeared obvious. The Mongols had lost their resolve. He concluded that these nomads lacked the ability to overcome strong fortifications. Confident that the enemy was broken, he believed victory was within reach. Acting on this belief, the Jin army abandoned its strong defensive position and advanced into the open plains to destroy the fleeing Mongol forces completely. This decision played perfectly into Jeeb's plan. The moment the Jin troops left the safety of the mountain pass and spread out across open terrain, everything changed. The Mongol units that had been retreating suddenly turned back as one. At the same time, Genghis Khan's main army, whose presence the Jin had never suspected, surged forward from multiple directions in a carefully planned ambush. Caught in open ground without fortifications or terrain advantages, the Jin army was surrounded on all sides. Historical accounts describe the devastation vividly, stating that bodies lay scattered across the land like rotting logs stretching for miles. Jeeb captured the pass with minimal losses, achieving a decisive victory. So why was this tactic so devastatingly effective? The first reason lies in human psychology. In warfare, retreat is usually associated with failure. When an enemy appears to flee, the natural instinct is to pursue and eliminate them. The Mongols deliberately exploited this reaction. Second, the tactic forced opposing armies to abandon their strongest defensive positions. Most medieval armies relied on formations, terrain, or fortifications for protection. Once they broke formation to chase the enemy, they lost cohesion and became vulnerable. Third, and perhaps most astonishing, the Mongols were capable of retreating while continuing to fight. They perfected the Parthian shot, a technique that allowed cavalry archers to fire arrows backward while riding at full speed. This meant that even during a retreat, Mongol warriors continued inflicting casualties. Imagine yourself as a Jin soldier chasing what you believe is a defeated enemy. Excitement builds as you sense victory approaching. Then, without warning, the fleeing cavalry twist their bodies in saddle and unleash arrows at you while still galloping away. You attempt to close the distance, but they remain just beyond reach. Your formation begins to break apart. Some soldiers rush forward, others lag behind. Confusion spreads. Then realization strikes. You've been lured into a trap, but escape is no longer possible. This feigned retreat was not a one-time deception. Genghis Khan and his commanders employed it repeatedly throughout their campaigns. In some cases, they retreated for days or even weeks, drawing enemy forces deep into unfamiliar territory, controlled by the Mongols. Once the enemy was exhausted and far from supply lines, the Mongols would strike with overwhelming force. If the feigned retreat relied on psychology, the arrow storm relied on sheer destructive power. Picture a battlefield encounter with the Mongols. You stand in formation with your unit, waiting for the enemy to advance. In the distance, you spot Mongol cavalry appearing as small figures on the horizon. You brace yourself for a charge, but it never comes. Instead, the cavalry halts at a distance you believe is safe, roughly 200 meters away. Your bows cannot reach that far. You assume you are out of danger. Then the sky darkens. Thousands of arrows rise into the air at once, forming a black arc across the sky before crashing down like a violent storm. It is not a scattered volley, but a dense, relentless rain of arrows. The sound is terrifying, a shrill scream as they descend. Some arrows are designed with holes that produce an eerie whistling noise, transforming sound itself into a psychological weapon. You raise your shield as arrows begin to strike. One lands on the ground beside you. Another slams into your shield. A third pierces the shoulder of the soldier next to you. He collapses, screaming. Around you, men are falling by the dozens, then the hundreds. Before you can recover, another wave of arrows arrives, then another and another without pause. This relentless barrage was known as the arrow storm, one of the Mongols' most feared tactics. Each Mongol warrior carried approximately 60 arrows stored in quivers attached to saddles and backs. A unit of 10,000 men, called a chuman, possessed 600,000 arrows. They were capable of firing all of them in less than an hour. But sheer volume alone was not what made this tactic extraordinary. The true power lay in coordination. Mongol cavalry operated in rotating waves. The first wave advanced, released arrows, and withdrew. As they pulled back, the second wave moved forward and fired, followed by the third, creating a continuous and unbroken stream of arrows. Commanders used flags, torches, and specialized whistling arrows to signal commands. They could concentrate fire on specific sections of an enemy line, much like modern artillery. Remarkably, they achieved this level of precision while remaining constantly mobile. The Mongol bow itself was a technological marvel. Crafted from multiple materials including wood, antler, sinew, fish glue, and silk, it took more than a year to complete. The result was a compact, yet immensely powerful weapon. It allowed accurate shots beyond 200 meters, precise targeting at 150 meters, and area saturation fire up to 400 meters, creating lethal zones no enemy could escape. The most impressive aspect of Mongol archery was their ability to shoot accurately while riding at full speed. Most civilizations struggle with this because the motion of the horse made it almost impossible to aim properly. The Mongols, however, discovered a crucial secret. The ideal moment to release an arrow is when all four horses' hooves are off the ground at the midpoint of the gallop. At that instant, there is virtually no shaking, making the shot extremely stable. This allowed Mongol warriors to shoot with precision while galloping at full speed, a skill that most other cavalry forces could never master. The psychological effect of the arrow storm was as powerful as the physical damage it caused. Imagine standing in formation as the sky darkens with arrows hurtling toward you. You know that some will strike, but there is nothing you can do except raise your shield and pray. All around, soldiers fall under the relentless assault. The screams of the wounded and the terrifying whistling of specialized arrows create panic and chaos. After 10 or 15 minutes of this unrelenting attack, even the bravest warriors begin to hesitate. Some consider breaking formation and fleeing. Others feel compelled to advance or launch an attack, desperate to escape the nightmare. This was precisely the effect the Mongols sought, to disrupt discipline and force the enemy into confusion. Once formations faltered, Mongol heavy cavalry, clad in armor and armed with spears and swords, would charge to finish the job decisively. Yet the most formidable weapon of all was not arrows or horses. It was fear itself. Genghis Khan understood a truth that eluded many commanders. The greatest victory is one achieved without fighting, and the most effective way to accomplish that is to terrify the enemy into surrendering before a battle even begins. A prime example of Mongol psychological warfare occurred during the campaign against the Naiman tribe in 1204. Genghis Khan knew the Naiman forces outnumbered his own. On the night before the battle, he ordered each Mongol warrior to light 5 separate fires. Though the Mongol army numbered only around 40,000, the illusion of 5 fires per soldier created the impression of more than 200,000 troops. Naiman scouts observed the vast sea of flames and reported seeing an overwhelming Mongol force. That night, the morale of the Naiman army collapsed. When Genghis Khan attacked the following morning, many Naiman units fled without engaging in combat. Mongol psychological warfare went far beyond simple deception. Before invading any region, Genghis Khan would dispatch spies into target cities. These operatives disguised themselves as merchants, travelers, monks, or other civilians. Their task was not to fight, but to spread terrifying stories about the Mongol army, how no resisting city had survived, how those who surrendered would be spared and treated well, and how those who resisted faced complete annihilation. These tales were not entirely false. Genghis Khan deliberately created memorable examples. When a city resisted, the Mongols would conduct selective, systematic massacres, always leaving some survivors. These witnesses would escape to neighboring cities, spreading word of the horrors they had seen, amplifying fear, and ensuring that others surrendered preemptively. A notorious example occurred in 1221 in the city of Nishapur in Persia. When Nishapur resisted, Genghis Khan ordered a total massacre. Persian historian Juvani recorded that every living creature, including humans, cats, and dogs, was killed. The heads of the dead were then stacked into massive pyramids outside the city gates. Brutal as it was, this terror served a strategic purpose. News of the massacre spread rapidly. Subsequent cities surrendered immediately, without resistance, knowing the fate that awaited them if they defied the Mongols. Every city that capitulated saved Mongol lives, time, and resources. Genghis Khan once conveyed the philosophical basis of this fear-based strategy to messengers, stating, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent me to punish you." This was not mere religious arrogance. It was a calculated psychological tactic. Resistance against the Mongols was framed as resistance to divine will. They employed a wide array of other techniques to intimidate enemies. When moving across terrain, Mongols tied branches to their horses' tails to produce enormous dust clouds, exaggerating the size of their army. They placed dummies on extra horses, giving the impression of countless forces. Whistling arrows were used in early battles not to kill, but to produce terrifying sounds that unsettled enemies before combat began. Before besieging a city, they often devastated surrounding areas, slaughtering livestock, burning crops, and destroying villages, only to vanish entirely. Citizens inside the city would think the Mongols had departed and feel a temporary sense of relief. Then, just as morale began to recover, the Mongols would return with full forces and siege equipment. The sudden reappearance of the army after a period of apparent absence struck fear deep into defenders, breaking their confidence and resolve. Perhaps the most clever psychological innovation was how the Mongols treated those who surrendered. Unlike many invading armies, they often honored their promises. Cities and rulers who capitulated were spared, and in some cases, useful individuals were recruited into the Mongol army. Conversely, those who resisted faced no mercy. This created a simple yet powerful strategic dynamic. Surrender and live, resist and die. With every surrender, rumors of Mongol invincibility grew, reinforcing perception of fear and inevitability. Through these methods, the Mongols transformed warfare by combining physical prowess with psychological mastery. The ability to fight while retreating, the terrifying efficiency of the arrow storm, and the carefully calculated use of fear allowed them to conquer vast territories with fewer losses than conventional armies. Each technique was designed not only to destroy, but to manipulate the minds of their enemies, ensuring that battles were often won before a single blow was struck. Their approach showed that true power lay not just in numbers or weapons, but in understanding and controlling perception, morale, and fear of those they faced. Eventually, the Mongols' reputation became their most potent weapon, but even more remarkable than their tactics was their ability to learn and adapt. Many people misunderstand the Mongols, thinking they were simply a destructive nomadic force. In reality, they were among the fastest learners in military history. One of the most striking examples of this adaptability was their transformation from steppe cavalry to masters of siege warfare. In 1211, when Genghis Khan first faced fortified Chinese cities, he encountered severe difficulties. Mongol cavalry, while devastating on open plains, was ineffective against 30-foot stone and brick walls. Most commanders might have given up or simply starved the city into submission, but Genghis Khan did something different. He observed, learned, and adapted. When capturing initial cities, instead of executing everyone as rumor suggested, the Mongols separated out engineers, architects, and craftsmen. These individuals were treated well and tasked with teaching the Mongols how to breach fortifications. Chinese engineers instructed them in building trebuchets, catapults capable of hurling 100-pound stones at walls. Persian engineers demonstrated how to tunnel beneath walls, to collapse foundations. Later, Islamic engineers introduced counterweight trebuchets, an advanced technology that increased range and impact. But the Mongols didn't merely learn, they innovated. Whereas most armies of the time used siege engines solely for prolonged city attacks, the Mongols adapted them for battlefield support, integrating them with cavalry operations. They modified designs so trebuchets could be disassembled, transported, and rapidly reassembled for mobility. By 1221, just 10 years after encountering Chinese fortifications, the Mongols had become one of the most effective siege forces in the world. During the siege of Nishapur, thousands of trebuchets, giant crossbows, and other devices were deployed. Chinese trebuchet operators working for the Mongols achieved astonishing accuracy. With a single stone, they could hit a target the size of a camel's eye. Beyond stones, the Mongols experimented with various munitions, burning oil jars to ignite fires, decomposing animal carcasses to spread disease, primitive napalm bombs made of sulfur, saltpeter, and petroleum, and most terrifying, plague-infected human corpses. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa in Crimea, they catapulted plague victims into the city, one of the earliest known uses of biological warfare. The Mongols didn't stop at siegecraft. They absorbed knowledge from every conquered culture. From the Chinese, they learned administration and bureaucracy, managing a vast empire. Persians taught astronomy and mathematics. Muslims provided lessons in medicine and architecture. They adopted the Uyghur writing system to compensate for the lack of a Mongol script. Genghis Khan's policy was simple. Anyone with useful skills, regardless of origin or religion, could serve the empire and advance based on merit. This contrasted sharply with contemporary empires, where status depended on lineage. By the 1270s, the Mongols had even mastered naval warfare, a complete novelty for steppe nomads. They assembled a fleet of 5,000 ships with 70,000 sailors, largely Chinese and Korean, to invade Japan and Southeast Asia. Their adaptability enabled conquest of vastly different environments: frozen Russian steppes, Middle Eastern deserts, Afghan mountains, and European plains. However, all tactics would have been meaningless without meticulous organization. This may be the least flashy but most vital component of Mongol success. Genghis Khan was not just a warrior. He was an exceptional strategist and organizer. He understood that a great army is not merely a collection of skilled individuals, but a coordinated machine. He introduced a decimal system. 10 men formed an arban, 10 arbans 100 men, formed a zun, 10 zuns 1,000 men, formed a mingan, 10 mingans 10,000 men, formed a tuman. This system was effective for several reasons. First, simplicity. Every soldier knew his unit, his commander, and his immediate responsibilities. No confusion arose. Second, flexibility. A tuman could operate independently or coordinate with other units. Mingans could detach for separate missions and then rejoin the main force. This structure allowed complex campaigns with multiple columns acting independently yet harmoniously. Third, collective responsibility. In an Arban, if one member deserted, all 10 were executed. Harsh as it seems, this created an extraordinary incentive for soldiers to protect each other. Courage and loyalty were rewarded, while negligence threatened everyone. The system also fostered unity. Genghis Khan intentionally mixed warriors from different tribes, breaking traditional tribal loyalties and forming a unified Mongol identity. Leaders were chosen by ability rather than lineage. One notable example is the General E, initially an enemy who had shot Genghis Khan's horse in battle, later recognized for his skill and elevated to command. This combination of adaptability, organization, meritocracy, and psychological mastery made the Mongols a force unlike any other. They were not simply horsemen and archers. They were strategists, engineers, and innovators. Every campaign, every city, and every conquered territory provided lessons that were immediately applied and improved upon. Steppe nomads became siege experts, naval commanders, and administrators of one of the largest empires in history. By integrating knowledge, discipline, and fear, Genghis Khan forged an army capable of overcoming any obstacle, in any environment, against any opponent. When captured, Jeeb admitted his actions honestly. Genghis Khan, impressed by both his honesty and military skill, spared his life and recruited him. Jeeb later became one of the most brilliant Mongol commanders, leading campaigns that expanded the empire across vast territories. Subutai, the greatest Mongol general, came from a humble blacksmith family but possessed exceptional talent. He commanded the empire's largest campaigns and never lost a major battle during 60 years of service. This system of leadership was radically different from European feudal armies or Chinese dynasties, where command positions were often inherited or purchased. There's a saying about the Mongols: they conquer a city 10 years before arriving. This was not an exaggeration. Genghis Khan understood a principle still relevant to modern military strategy. Information is the most powerful weapon. Before each campaign, the Mongols dispatched hundreds of scouts and spies. These individuals were rarely obvious soldiers. They posed as merchants, monks, nomads, or even recently released captives. Their task was to gather every possible detail: terrain, passable roads, rivers, mountain passes; politics, leaders, faction, internal conflicts; military strength, number troops, weapons, fortifications; economy, sources of food, trade routes; and psychology, loyalty, fears, morale. With this intelligence, Genghis Khan could plan campaigns in meticulous detail. A classic example was the invasion of Europe in 1241. Subutai had planted spies in Poland and Hungary a decade before the main army arrived. When the Mongols finally invaded, they knew every road, every castle, and every conflict among European rulers. Communication was equally revolutionary. The Mongols implemented a relay system called the Yam. Along the empire's main routes, stations were established every 40 to 50 kilometers, each with fresh horses and personnel. Messengers could change horses at each station, dramatically increasing the speed of information transfer. News could travel 300 to 400 kilometers per day, far faster than in any other contemporary empire. Genghis Khan and Karakorum could receive updates from Persia within weeks instead of months. This system allowed the empire, despite its size, to remain coordinated. Generals could receive instructions and send reports promptly, while reinforcements could arrive quickly in case of rebellion or emergency. Yet all these tactics, technologies, and strategies would fail without one crucial element: discipline. The Mongol army was renowned for ironclad discipline, unparalleled at the time. No warrior could leave his post without orders. Looting was forbidden until complete victory. Surrender was never permitted without command. The Yasa, Genghis Khan's legal code, strictly enforced rules. Desertion meant execution. Sleeping on guard duty, execution. Withholding war spoils, execution. Unauthorized looting, execution. Though harsh, This produced an army free from common medieval problems, such as indiscriminate looting, rape, or civilian massacre. Discipline also supported Mongol policy. Cities that surrendered were often treated well, reinforcing the reputation that capitulation ensured safety. If soldiers acted recklessly, this policy would fail. Discipline was evident in battle as well. Whereas many armies collapsed on a surprise attack, Mongols maintained formation. They responded automatically to signals, flags, torches, horns, and whistling arrows without verbal commands. This enabled complex maneuvers, including feigned retreats, multi-sided encirclements, or splitting and regrouping units seamlessly. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire in history, spanning from the Pacific to Eastern Europe and from Siberia to India. Its territory exceeded that of the Roman Empire, Alexander's empire, and the Islamic Caliphate combined. But the Mongols' influence extended beyond land. Militarily, they transformed warfare permanently. First, psychological warfare. Prior to the Mongols, it existed sporadically, but they systematized it. Modern militaries now recognize that morale is as crucial as battlefield victory. Second, mobility and speed. The Mongols demonstrated that small, agile, flexible forces could defeat larger, slower ones, a principle central to modern tactics. Third, intelligence. Their scouting and espionage systems were precursors to modern intelligence agencies. Fourth, organization. The decimal system and chain of command influenced military structure for centuries. Fifth, concentrated firepower. Coordinated aero barges foreshadowed modern mass firepower from artillery to airstrikes. Six, combined arms. The Mongols integrated light and heavy cavalry, archers, and siege weapons, a principle that remains fundamental in contemporary military strategy. Yet the Mongols' impact extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing administration, culture, and global history in ways that shaped the modern world. The Mongol Empire, though forged through war and conquest, also created a remarkable period of relative stability and prosperity across the vast territories it controlled, known as the Pax Mongolica or Mongol Peace. Under their rule, the Silk Road, which had previously been fragmented by local wars, rivalries, and constant conflict, was unified under a single authority for the first time. This unprecedented security allowed merchants to travel long distances, from Venice to Beijing, without having crossed multiple hostile borders or risk robbery and violence. The result was an extraordinary exchange of culture, technology, ideas, and knowledge between East and West. Chinese innovations, such as gunpowder, traveled to the Middle East and Europe. Printing technology spread across continents. Knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine moved rapidly along these trade routes, enriching societies that were once isolated from each other. The Mongols' actions even indirectly contributed to Europe emerging from the Middle Ages. Scholars, engineers, and artisans fleeing the destruction in the Middle East brought their skills and knowledge to European cities, which helped lay the foundations for the Renaissance. Of course, the prosperity came at a tremendous cost. The Mongol conquests were brutal and deadly. It is estimated that 30 to 40 million people died during their campaigns, roughly 11% of the world's population at the time. Yet, beyond the devastation, the Mongols left lessons that remain applicable today. Returning to the question posed at the start, can the strategies and principles used by the Mongols be applied to our modern lives and work? The answer is yes, though not their violence, but the underlying strategic thinking. Lesson 1. Speed and flexibility often triumph over size and strength. In today's fast-moving business, technology, or creative industries, small and agile teams can outperform larger, slower, and more cumbersome organizations. The Mongols, with only 100,000 warriors, conquered empires numbering millions, not because they were stronger individually, but because they were faster, more adaptable, and capable of acting decisively. Modern startups operate on the same principle, using rapid iteration and flexibility to disrupt large, established companies. Lesson 2. Learn from others continuously. The Mongols were not arrogant. They never assumed their methods were perfect. When confronted with a new challenge, such as heavily fortified cities, they quickly learned from those they conquered. Chinese engineers, Persian architects, and Islamic siege specialists taught them techniques that transformed their army. In modern life and work, the fastest learners are often the most successful. When markets shift, new technologies emerge, or competitors introduce better methods, those who adapt fastest gain the greatest advantage. Lesson 3. Information is power. The Mongols invested heavily in intelligence, sending spies and scouts far ahead of armies to gather every detail. Today, this translates to market research, data analysis, and understanding both customers and competitors. Decisions based on thorough knowledge are far more effective than blind action. Lesson 4. Organization and discipline often matter more than raw talent. A well-organized team of average individuals can outperform a group of geniuses if coordination, systems, and clear responsibilities are in place. The Mongols succeeded not because each soldier was individually superior, but because their army operated like a perfectly tuned machine. In any workplace, business venture, or large project, structure and clarity of roles often produce results far beyond individual brilliance. Lesson 5. Psychology can be as powerful as actual capability. The Mongols conquered countless cities without firing a shot, relying solely on reputation and fear. In negotiations, careers, and business, perception matters as much as skill. Establish a reputation for reliability, competence, and excellence. The respect you cultivate can open doors and reduce obstacles. Lesson 6. Choose people based on ability, not background. Genghis Khan promoted leaders and experts based on talent and merit, ignoring lineage, social status, or origin. This allowed him to assemble the best generals, engineers, and administrators. Today, removing bias in hiring and evaluating people solely on capability produces stronger, more effective teams. Talent can come from anywhere, regardless of age, gender, or background. Lesson 7. Sometimes complete transformation is necessary. The Mongols evolved from steppe cavalry to siege masters, then added naval forces. They were not afraid to reinvent themselves to meet new challenges. In modern life, this principle applies to career changes, learning new skills, or starting from scratch when circumstances require it. Growth often requires a willingness to leave the familiar behind entirely. The story of the Mongols is not one of an inherently superior or unique people, but of strategic principles applied consistently and relentlessly. They were not the first to use cavalry, bows, psychological tactics, or siege engines, but they were the first to combine all these elements into a coordinated system and execute flawlessly. And that leads to the final lesson. Greatness rarely comes from inventing something entirely new. It comes from executing the fundamentals better, faster, and more consistently than anyone else. The Mongols reshaped the world not because they were superhuman, but because they mastered the principles of strategy and applied them ruthlessly. Their lessons, speed, adaptability, intelligence, organization, and psychology, remain relevant today. They demonstrate that understanding core principles and applying them consistently can achieve extraordinary outcomes in life, work, and personal growth. Now, I want to hear from you. Which Mongol lesson resonates most with your life right now? Which mountain pass are you facing that might require a completely different approach than you've used before? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this exploration valuable, hit the like button so more people can discover it. Subscribe to the channel to follow other deep historical stories. I read every comment and genuinely want to know your perspective. Thank you for watching until the end, and I look forward to sharing the next story with you.